Perfect. Hello. Let me see if I Hello, everybody. We are waiting for people to join. Hopefully, people will be starting to join in a second. And I am going to try to share the screen. For some reason, it's not working. I think that's working. Oh, hello. Afternoon from Sicily. So hello, everybody. Sorry, technical problems. I was a bit distracted. Hello from London, UK. I teach Swahili. I'm learning Spanish. Oh, hola, learning Spanish. Well, I teach Spanish and Greek and Latin. So yeah, give me. I cannot hear you or see you because this is a webinar, so I won't be able to see you. But if you write on the chat before everybody kind of joins in, I can see where you're coming from and how you are doing so far. So it's been good 3 days. Give us a thumbs up if you're liking the show. Hopefully you are. And the other thing is I won't be able to. Oh, hello from Scotland. Hello. I won't be able to see the question and answer box or the chat while I'm presenting. So if you can chat away between you in the chat, but I won't be able to see what you're saying. And at the end, I will have a look at the questions and answers box. If anybody has a question, maybe you don't, or comments, if you want to comment something, and especially because I'm going to ask you to comment on some things. I think we are a little bit late. So we are going to give just like 2 more minutes and then we start. So if you can write in the chat, why are you here? Because this is probably one of the most philosophical, theoretical talks that you are going to have in the show. This is all about myths and comparative linguistics and things like that. Normally, I'm a very practical topic speaker, and I go always for things to teach in the classroom. Today, I decided to go a little more philosophical and more theoretical, but still with something that I will tell you that I normally do in my classes anyway. But are you interested in the European? Are you interested in myths of origin of languages? If you can, write it in the chat and I will see it before deleting the chat. I mean, before closing the chat. Okay. Okay. Martina from North London. Anything to do with languages? Well done. Yeah, brilliant, Martina. Hello, Martina. Languages and linguistics generally. Great. Lorenzo Salvioni is Italiano, maybe. Perfect. Interested in a mixture of languages, but only learn European languages so far. Yes, I would love to learn some Asian languages as well. I don't have time. I'm very interested in learning Sanskrit and Tamil. Perfect. Brilliant. So I will leave James from UK. Want to learn them all? Yes, James. Brilliant. And Asian languages are a great gateway to learn them all. Excellent. So we are going to start. I'm just going to minimize the chat so I won't be able to see what you say. But yeah, so chat away if you want. So this talk is called the language of Babel, or why we cannot understand each other, and it's going to be about ancient myths and comparative linguistics, with some reference to classroom activities, but not many. So, in his iconic study, After Babel, Aspects of Language and Translation, George Steiner stated something quite interesting. Translation exists because men speak different languages. And this truism is in fact founded on a situation which can be regarded as enigmatic and as posing problems of extreme psychological and socio-historical difficulty. Why should human beings speak thousands of different, mutually incomprehensible tongues? It is only when we reflect on it, when we lift the facts from the misleading context of the obvious, that the possible strangeness, the possible unnaturalness of the human linguistic order strikes us. Why does this unified, though individually unique mammalian species not use one common language? The questions that Steiner raises delve into the depths of the philosophy of language. The human capacity for language and the diversity of human languages are two characteristics of the human species that have amazed all different cultures of the world since time immemorial. And that is why practically all known cultures have some narrative that attempts to account for both situations. A proof of this fact is the little study by Arno Borst, which I'm going to show you the quote in there. It's called Der Turmbaum von Babel. It's a colossal work in 4 volumes that collects the most relevant versions from around the world, from the most diverse cultures, and from the most varied periods. So give us a thumbs up or raise your hand or do some sort of reaction if your culture has a myth or a story that talks about the origin of languages or the diversification of languages, just like a reaction. I want to see how many. And the reactions take a little bit to come. Yeah, Babel is the one, yeah. And do you know more than one version of this myth? So have you ever heard of any other versions? Or it's just Babel? Babel is the one. Yeah, yes, everybody knows this. Yeah, exactly. Everybody knows this story very well. On top of my head, maybe Italy or Europe. Yes, in Italy and Europe generally is only the Tower of Babel. Well, you would be surprised to know that there are many, many more than that. And I'm just going to talk about the most intriguing ones I found, or the most curious ones. The fact that most of us are familiar with one story or some sort of story about why we communicate in different languages speaks to the fact that we are all still perplexed by the strangeness of this reality, and students more so. The most frequent question I have had over the years from the most various students in the most varied courses is, why can't we speak the same language? Especially teenage students, they just are so frustrated. This question is normally triggered by some difficulty in grammar or vocabulary that makes them feel frustrated. And they are right. Why can't we just speak the same language? This frustration is a great way to introduce students to some myths about languages and to introduce them to the idea of a possible original human tongue from which all the other derives, to the world of philology, to the world of comparative linguistics. Because let's be honest, we need to instill some love for linguistics and curiosity for linguistics to the newer generations, or we will be out of jobs soon. So in this talk, I want first to present you with some interesting stories from around the world that attempt to explain the origin of languages, inspiring, intriguing, and brilliant stories that will spark yours and your students' curiosity. And second, I will focus a little bit on the use of comparative linguistics and the elusive Indo-European language. Scientific truth or just another interesting story? So if you know some other stories or myths or that, about languages and how languages came to be, please make sure that you write them on the chat. If anything comes to mind while we are doing the talk, just feel free to do it there or write in the question and answer box. So how all it began. The oldest account we have registered is a story called Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata. The Sumerian myth of Enmerkar, written in Sumerian language and inscribed on a tablet in cuneiform writing, originates from ancient Mesopotamia and dates from approximately the end of 3000, beginning of 2000 BC. The text tells how Enmerkar, who was the king of Uruk, fails to convince the lord of Arata to send him the tribute intended to build a ziggurat in Eridu, causing the goddess Inanna to abandon Arata and its lord for Enmerkar and move to Uruk. This is all very complicated situation, but it's basically these two kings. Arata was an ancient state formation of renown somewhere in the Middle East or South Asia since circa 2500 to 2100 BC. It is mentioned in the oldest Sumerian legends as being a wealthy, mountainous, upriver country ruled by a king called Ensu-Keshdana. The two main candidates for Arata's identity are the mountainous region of later Urartu and the newly discovered Geoff civilization in southern Iran. Arata and Uruk appear as two ancient kingdoms in competition, and the division of languages occur not because of a conflict between God and man, as in the book of Genesis, but because of a conflict between two gods, the gods Enlil and Enki, who divide the languages. However, we don't know the reason why he was angered, and the reason of the conflict is not explained in the text. However, that is a picture of the text in cuneiform form, and this is the oldest account. This is lines 135 to 155, but we are going to focus only on the highlighted bits. So in this part, it says, the whole universe, the well-guarded people, may they all address Enlil together in a single language. For at that time, for the ambitious lord, for the ambitious princes, for the ambitious kings, Enki, the lord of abundance and of steadfast decisions, the wise and knowing lord of the land, the expert of the gods, chosen for wisdom, the lord of Eridug, shall change the speech in their mouths, as many as he had placed there. And so the speech of mankind is truly one. Similar versions to the Sumerian myth about the origin of languages were preserved by later Greek writers, such as Eusebius and Syncellus. Their most important source for this was the history of Babylon, written by Berossus in Greek. And Berossus was a priest of Bel Marduk, the Babylonian god Marduk, between 290 and 278 BC. In his work, Berossus reproduced all known historical facts and traditions derived from native sources. So it is not surprising that the account of Babylonians' myths and beliefs corresponds almost 100% with the versions that we have in these cuneiform texts that were produced 3,000 years earlier to Berossus. The Hebrew narrative of the origin of languages remained unknown to much of humanity for a very, very long time. Therefore, Greece and Rome approached the myth of origins of languages and the division of languages not through Genesis, but thanks to Berossus, whose history, although it did not reach us in full, was transmitted to us partially through fragments and quotes made by other authors such as Eusebius. And you will see when we have a look at the Greek version of the division of languages that there is a similarity between the Sumerian version and the Greek version, and that is to say, the dispute is amongst gods and not between God and human. But the most famous account of the story, and the one that you all knew, is the story of the Tower of Babel, or Torre de Babel. You know, for me, it's very difficult to pronounce Babel, to say Babel and not Babel, because in my mind it's Babel. But anyway, so the Tower of Babel. A second explanation of the phenomenon of human linguistic diversity, which has given its name to the episode of the Tower of Babel, appears in the biblical narrative of the book of Genesis that describes the construction of the famous tower. Now we're going to focus on some of these bits. So the text says, now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. And then they are settled there and they say, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we can make a name for ourselves. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. And the Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. And this is the account that everybody knows about. We have the Tower of Babel and the confusion of languages. The diversification of languages and the dispersion of people are presented in this story from another point of view. It is no longer, as in the previous myth, something blessed by God, but rather a punishment imposed on human pride. Shinar is the biblical name of the plain between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, called Mesopotamia. Dislocate the episode in Babylon, the most renowned city in that region. The cities of Mesopotamia had a temple with a step tower in the shape of a pyramid, called a ziggurat. The highest part of these towers was considered the link between heaven and earth, and the ziggurat of Babylon, which measured a whopping 90 meters on side, plus 90 meters high, had 7 superimposed bodies or levels. In this story, the tower does not appear as a temple or as a religious symbol. It is rather the expression of human pride, which proposes to build a civilization for its own glory without taking into account God. A tower reaching to the heavens shows the characteristic expression of an excessive project which seeks to transcend all limits and therefore is hubristic and must be punished. And finally, the explanation of the name of Babel, that is Babylon. Babylonian tradition attributed to the name of the city the meaning gate of God or gate of the gods. But the biblical story, not without irony, associates it instead with the Hebrew verb balal, which means to confuse. So Babylon, Babel, Babel, the confusion city. And this is where all the confusion of tongues came to be. Other myths and legends make reference to a tree, not a tower, the tree of knowledge, the tree of life, or the tree of wisdom, the world tree, where there is a connection between the three branches and the dispersion of language and cultures around the world. An old account of a version of this myth was collected by A.G. White, who stated, "The wonderful world tree or tree of knowledge grew in the center of the earth. It was so tall that it almost reached the sky. He said in his heart, I will lift my head to heaven and spread my branches all over the earth. And I will gather men under my shadow, and I will protect them. And I will prevent them from being separated." But Rama, to punish the tree's arrogance, cut off his branches and threw them to the earth from where they flourished as wata trees, and made differences of beliefs. And language and customs prevail on the earth to disperse men over its surface. In this account, the myth is associated to Hindu mythology, although the sources are not completely verified. Nevertheless, the story associates the dispersion of languages again with an act of arrogance and pride, with hubris. So we speak different languages as a punishment. And quite true, my students learning to use the pluperfect subjunctive in Spanish think that languages are a punishment that we have gotten because of something we did in another life. A different version of this is the version that I was telling you about in Greek mythology. So this version goes back to the dispute between gods rather than to humans' own fault. So this is not related to humans' hubris. This is related to a dispute between two gods. It is the Greek version collected and transmitted by Latin author Hyginus in one of his fables. And we are talking here about possibly 1st century BC. So in his fable 143, Hyginus says that a long time ago, humanity spoke a single language. But after Mercury multiplied the languages, the act also divided the nations, and conflict began between men. Zeus was angered by Mercury's act, but could not change it. So Mercury's role here seems to be that of the Tower of Babel in Jewish mythology. That is to say, the division of humans into different nations through the diversity of language. However, tradition seems to indicate that this fable has no other analogy in Greek or Roman myths. So this is the only place in which we find this version. So the text says like this, speaks like this. Men lived without towns or laws for many centuries, speaking a single language under the rule of Jupiter. But after Mercury had explained the languages of men, for which reason he is called hermeneutes, interpreters, since Mercury in Greek is called Hermes, he too divided the nations. The discord arose among mortals, and this which did not please Jupiter. And this is the account we have from Greek mythology. Another interesting version comes from Africa, from the Basari people in Togo. In this version, the creator, Unumbote, who has created a man, an antelope, and a snake, gives them seeds and tells them to plant them. From one of the seeds, a fruit tree grows, but the fruits are only eaten by the Creator. Like in the biblical story, the snake tells the man and his wife, who at this point we don't know where the wife came from, but appears in the story. The snake tells them that they should all, not just them, that they should all eat the fruits as they are all hungry. The antelope that doesn't eat the fruit, but men and women do. They do so, and when the Creator returns, they tell him they did it because they were hungry and because of the snake, but because they were hungry, that's the main point. And as a result, the creators give men food so that they don't go hungry. However, when men start to eat, they divide the food they divide themselves in groups, and they divide the food into different bowls. And each group of men eat their food from a different bowl, never sharing their bowls between them. So in this case, the diversification of languages is linked to transgression again, and to the human desire to access something that is forbidden, something that does not belong to them, and that belongs to a superior being. So the story is quite long, but if we focus on the highlighted bit, this says, Unumbote gave sorghum to man, so this is after they ate fruit, along with yams and millet. The people gather in groups that ate from the same bowl, never the bowls of the other groups. This is the way differences in language arose. Since then, the people have ruled the land. And this is when an interesting fact is that the division of languages is also related to food, to nutrition. So, what do you think so far? Are we being punished with the diversification of languages? Is this a punishment to us because of our transgression? And sorry, sorry, I just saw the chat. It says, what a story, I use that in my class. Punishment, indeed. So do you think, give us a reaction, thumbs up or something, or write something in the chat. Are we being punished with the diversification of languages? Is this a punishment to us, to humans? Okay. So far, these versions seem to associate language and the ability to speak and communicate with something divine, and to the confusion of languages with transgression and punishment, as we were saying. But what I believe we are missing is that the diversification of languages is also associated with the desire to know more, with the search for unreachable divine knowledge, and with nutrition, curiously. The diversification of languages sprouted the diversification of cultures, the birth of nations. Is diversity then such a bad thing? Is it a punishment? Or is it a reward for humanity's insatiable thirst for knowledge and unwavering desire to push boundaries? Or is it a way of nurturing? Are we doomed because we can't speak the same language and we can't understand each other? Or have we been given the opportunity to learn and to appreciate other ways of seeing and thinking? Is the world poorer because communication became harder, or is it so much richer? Imagine if we all spoke the same language. It would be so boring. Yes, in all these myths, language diversity is portrayed as a curse, as a punishment. Yes, yes. Except maybe in the first one. In the first one, yeah, it's not our fault, but it's a dispute between men, between gods. So these and other questions like this, are a brilliant way to engage your students into debating about linguistics, about why they are learning a language, why it's worth learning a language, and why do we have to encourage people to learn language. You can also propose them to find other versions of why we all speak different languages and discuss their implication, because in each version you also have an ideology behind them, and the idea of a culture and the vision of the world that the culture has. So it is really, really interesting to provoke some thoughts in your lessons. But there is more, because we have been talking about European, Asian, and African versions, but we forgot about America. And we have also some very, very interesting legends and myths from America, not the US, but the continent. This is the first one. So, in an early 20th century book on comparative religion, the author Fraser quotes an Italian historian who collected some Aboriginal myths of creation in Mexico. The Mexicans, says this Italian historian Clavigero, with all other civilized nations, had a clear tradition, though somewhat corrupted by fable, of the creation of the world, of the universal flood, of the confusion of tongues, and of the dispersion of the people, and had actually all these events represented in their pictures. They said that when mankind were overwhelmed with the flood, none were preserved but a man called Coxcox, to whom others named Teosipaki, yes, and a woman called Xochiquetzal, which is also the name of a goddess, an Aztec goddess, Xochiquetzal, who saved themselves in a little bark, and having afterwards got to land upon a mountain called by them Poliacan, had there a great many children, that these children were all born dumb, so they couldn't speak, until a dove from a lofty tree imparted to them languages, but differing so much that they could not understand each other. So in this version of the myth, we don't have a relationship between the diversification of languages and punishment by God, but we have this dove that some conquistadores then associated with Holy Spirit, and thought that this was related also to some religion, some Christian kind of tradition. But we are not sure about that. There is another myth that belongs to the Mayan people, not the Aztecs, and that is actually much more explained and was transmitted in the Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh, or Book of the Council, or also called Book of the Community, written in the Quiche language of the Mayan civilization in southern Guatemala, is a narrative that aims to explain the origin of the world and of men and their evolution. The first written version dates to 1550, 1560 AD, but we don't know the original date for the original version. And we don't know either whether the original version was written with hieroglyphic paintings, or it was a group of narratives that was transmitted orally between the Mayans. So in book 3, we have four main events that are described, four main facts. This book 3 is called The Creation of the Corn Men and Description of Communities. So in this book, we learn that the first 4 real men were created, as well as the first 4 women, and that we have descended tribes from these people, that they spoke the same language, and that they traveled to a place called Tulan Suiba. And then that the language of the tribes becomes confused, and that the peoples disperse. Yeah? And this is what we have in book 3, chapter 4. This is how the 3 Quiche families were called, and they did not separate because the name of their god was one, Tohil of the Quiche, Tohil of the Tamub, and the Iloca. There was only one name of the god, and that is why the 3 Quiche families were not divided. Yes, so they had the same god, they spoke the same language, their god had the same name. Then they traveled to Tulan, and that was where the language of the tribes was altered. Their languages became different. They could no longer understand each other clearly after they had arrived in Tulan. There they also separated. Some went to the east, but many came here. Book 3, chapter 5 speaks of the first 4 men created in the 4th attempt to create men. And the 4th attempt is the one when they create the men using corn. These are the corn men, and that is why corn was so important in Mayan and Aztec culture. And this is what the story says. The language of Balam, Kitse, Balamakaf, Mahukutah, and Ikibalam is different. Oh, we have abandoned our language. What have we done? We are lost. Where were we deceived? Our language was only one when we arrived there into land. We had been created and educated in only one way. Yes? But this version adds in a truly wonderful way is the essential connection between migration and language variation. Even more, it adds causality. It is migration and the movement of people that causes language diversity. And this is such a relevant topic to discuss in lessons, no matter what language you teach, especially in the current climate of the world, and especially if you are teaching A-levels, because this migration racism is one of the topics that you have in A-levels. Because what would we human be without migration? We would probably be extinct, to be honest, and our diversification of cultures and languages wouldn't exist. But regardless of the provenance of the mythical accounts, the numerous versions about the origin of language diversification have 3 points in common. They all presuppose the existence of a unitary original language from which all other languages would have emerged. They all associate linguistic change with some sort of conflict, and they all connect linguistic change with migration, that is, with the displacement of a group in space. It took, however, until the 19th century for the first and the last of these common elements to begin to be addressed scientifically, and for comparative linguistics to be born as a science. So anyone who has ever faced the marvelous task of learning a new language would have resorted to comparisons, to compare words of the language they're learning to words of other languages they know or they might be learning at the same time, because they are trying to identify similarities or differences that would help them to learn the language. However, certain languages seem to present more similarities than others, or even similarities that seem more than simple coincidences. So if we look at this table, we will see that the similarities between the different languages there, once we focus only on phonology, obviously I have everything is written in Latin, the Latin alphabet. Once we focus only on phonology, these similarities are quite astonishing. And this is a great exercise also to do with the students, comparisons of different languages. Now, many coincidences within the different languages may be due to the use of neologisms or linguistic loans. However, it is very unlikely that words that identify kinship relationships, like those there, father, mother, brother, personal pronouns, the verb to be, frequently used verbs, and numbers are the product of loans between different languages. The assumption of a common ancestor for certain languages is based on this type of words precisely. The similarities between different languages can be explained in 2 ways. First, by diffusion or linguistic borrowing, as happens, for example, with many words coming from Latin and present in non-Latin languages like English. Or 2, by a common genetic inheritance. That is to say, at some point in time, there was a primordial language from which current languages would have branched out. And in this case, more than similarities, we are talking about correspondences. And this is what we have in this table. A language changes over time, and this is certainly evident to all of us. Some words fall into disuse and are replaced by others. Changes in the writing of a language can respond to a long process of phonetic changes, and changes in phonetics or semantics in a language can be product not only of political, economic, and social changes, but also can reflect linguistic contact. We say that different languages are related to each other when they all derive from a common ancestor. And comparative linguistics is the science that tries to understand the relationship between all these related languages. But in order to do so, we need to reconstruct the original language that produced all these branched out daughter languages. So for instance, if we take the case of English, Dutch, and German, it is clear that these 3 languages derive from a common ancestor. And this common ancestor is given the name of Proto-Germanic. This oldest language has not reached us in its original form, but it is possible to reconstruct it using the evidence that we have in the daughter languages that we have currently, English, Dutch, and German. So we will never have the original morphemes or phonemes that we had in the original Proto-Germanic language, but we do have like the phonemes or morphemes that sprouted from there. If you look at the map on screen, you can see a map of what we think are all Indo-European languages. And as you can see, it's quite a big area of the map. For all related Indo-European languages taken together, a language called Proto-Indo-European was reconstructed. Indo-European is not, however, the language of Babel. Unlike the idea transmitted through the ancestral myths of different cultures, Indo-European does not constitute the original language, but is one of the many linguistic families in the world, of which other families such Afro-Asiatic or Niger-Congolese, Uralic, Altaic, Austroasian, Sino-Tibetan, amongst many others exist. Indo-European refers to the language that is presumed to have been spoken by a human group that came to be called the Indo-Europeans, who are assumed to have lived in northeastern Europe and part of Asia, probably around 6,000, 5,000 BC. And this language would have given rise to more than 10 different linguistic groups, not all of them surviving today. And as you can see in the map, some of them are quite old languages. Our knowledge in this area is extremely limited, since non-written record has yet been discovered that can fully account for such protoforms as linguistic reality. That is, Indo-European is completely and by definition an artificial and theoretical reconstruction. So lots of people say, is this another story? Or is this scientifically proven? If you look at this slide, where we have some data on evidence and dates for our evidence. So we are thinking that the original group of Indo-Europeans should be located in around between 6,000 and 5,000 BC. However, the first written record that we have, so our first evidence, the oldest one, is from the 1900 BC. So this is like more than 3,000 years after what we suppose the time of the Europeans was. And as you can see on the other ones, the Hittite language, the Vedas, and Mycenaean Greek tablets are also quite recent in a way. So it's 3,000 more than 3,000 years later. The reconstruction of Indo-European has been possible essentially thanks to the comparative method. What we seek to find are sets of correspondences between different languages that indicate that the same phoneme or phonemes or a morpheme in a given language is invariably repeated under similar conditions and corresponds to a certain phoneme or set of phonemes in another language. A correspondence of this type makes it possible to carry out the reconstruction of an original phoneme in the modern language, even though that phoneme is not found in the daughter languages and is not found in the original form. And this is all very complicated, but it's easier to see when you have some examples. So this is a table where, sorry that the names are in Spanish, but this is a phonetic reconstruction showing correspondences and the comparative method. So the correspondences are at the bottom, and this is what the comparative method does. So you take different groups of languages and the same word. And as you can see, we have words for kinship relationships and numbers, which are words that wouldn't be borrowings, and the word to be, the verb to be. And you kind of try to understand how this phoneme works in different settings, in different environments, and whether the same correspondence applies in each different set of sounds. So this Proto-Indo-European phoneme T is reconstructed here, which is effectively translated as a T in Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit. So it maintains the distinctive features of a T. So it's dental, it's not voiced, and it's not aspirated. However, in Germanic, this T appears only when it's preceded by S, but it's by a sibilant sound. But between front vowels, we have a different sound that has also is also dental, but is voiced and fricative, unlike the original T. And then the other case in which Germanic varies from the original Proto-European phoneme is when it appears with the features dental, voice, and dental fricative and not voice. So that would be in the case where you have brothar. Yes, so brothar, that would be non-voiced. In this way, the reconstruction maintains even one of the distinctive features of each of the phonemes obtained in the daughter languages. So at least you know that these sounds are all related because at least there is one feature that is repeated. Yeah, and that is what the comparative method does. So the reconstruction of Indo-European presupposes the existence of an Indo-European community. If a language existed, then there were speakers of it who would have shared a homogeneous culture and civilization in ancient time. The reconstruction of the language has progressed hand in hand with attempts to reconstruct the people who supposedly spoke it, but this is truly, truly difficult. Countless attempts have been made to reconstruct an image of the civilization, both through the reconstruction of lexical terms and through comparison of the mythology, culture, and poetic traditions of the speakers of the daughter languages. And in fact, there have been lots of attempts to reconstruct an epic, Proto-Indo-European epic model using Gilgamesh, for instance, and Homeric epic and Hindic epic as well. However, the only route that offers any hope of reliability in the reconstruction of Indo-European culture is that which is traveled through language, because that is what we have. The vocabulary that has been reconstructed from Indo-European has served as a starting point for research on Indo-European civilization. And it has been possible to reconstruct a fairly large number of lexical terms from comparison between words from the daughter languages. And these terms refer mainly to agricultural activities, elements of work, livestock, and especially horses, artifacts, and some elements of flora and fauna. However, the results of these investigations are highly hypothetical, because first, we don't know the status that each of these terms had in the culture of the speakers who used it. And second, in many languages, words change their meaning or are lost over time. So we cannot be sure that this term is actually accurate. As an example, we have here the reconstructed Indo-European term for livestock. So the terms of the different languages correspond perfectly, absolutely perfectly, phonetically speaking. So we have Sanskrit, Avestan, Latin, Old English, Lithuanian, and Greek, and all have a word for cattle that can be phonetically reconstructed in Proto-Indo-European peku. That would mean cattle. So in the case of Greek, we have pokos, which is wool, but is related somehow to cattle. So although we find that in each of the daughter languages, this form means cattle, we are talking about linguistic records that belong to an era that goes from 1300 BC to the present day. But what we want to reconstruct is a word used in 5000 BC. So that is quite a long time ago. So if you look at the proposed stages in the evolution of Proto-Indo-European, we are talking about a word that was used at the beginning, early Proto-Indo-European, so between 4,500 and 4,000 BC, whereas the records that we have are 2000 BC onwards. So it is a whooping 3,000 years difference between what we want to reconstruct and the evidence. So it is possible to claim that a reconstructed form corresponds phonologically to pecus. But what is impossible to claim is that pecus meant cattle in the sense in which we understand it today. So if pecus in the 5th millennium BC meant cattle, what kind of cattle are we talking about? Are we talking of horses, oxen, cows, sheep? Were they then societies with an economy based on agriculture and livestock? Or were they gatherers? Were they dedicated to herding? These types of questions and doubts arise when we want to move from phonological and morphological reconstruction to semantic reconstruction. So imagine the problem where we want to move from semantic reconstruction to cultural reconstruction. Everything becomes highly, highly hypothetical. In addition to trying to reconstruct the culture, society, religion, and customs of the Indo-Europeans, numerous attempts have been made to try to find their place of origin, to find the Tower of Babel, if you want, to reconstruct the nucleus from which the Indo-Europeans would have dispersed throughout the lands of Europe and Asia. And you can see in this map, these are some of the most accepted hypotheses. And as you can see, there are many, many, many. And they are proposing where this original settlement was and from where they all expanded throughout Europe and Asia. So the idea of an original language from which all others, or as in the case of Indo-European, all others in this particular linguistic family, branch it out, is fascinating. It's so prolific and generates so much debate that can provide students with plenty of linguistic hypotheses to work with. And the exercises and activities you can plan using comparative linguistics are really interesting. And they can also help with learning vocabulary and understanding grammatical structures, and also to explain why these grammatical structures sometimes look so random as students frequently think they are. So I hope you enjoyed the talk. I'm sorry it was very dry and very, very theoretical, but I hope you are enjoying the language show so far as well. And if you have any questions or comments or anything, just put them on the chat, and we have thing like 1 minute for this. But I'm going to have a look at the chat and see what you have written. So we have, why is the word horse considered part of the essential stable vocabulary? Because all languages have a word for horse, and that's it. So we have, even in Mycenaean tablets, we have the words for horse as well, which is older than the Greek evidence that we have from 800 BC. Fascinating. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Stunning. Thank you. Fascinating. I had a Greek taster today, Asian Greek taster and Latin taster, and somebody said, "Oh, this is so interesting," and I was like, "That's great," because normally my students don't go like, this is so interesting. They go, "Oh my God, this is so boring." And if uh, there are thousands and thousands of versions, mythical versions, which is the thing that most interests me about this diversification of languages. And if you have time and you ever find it, the book by Bors is really fascinating. And there are lots of other collections of these mythical stories that normally come from the 19th century, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, because it's when all this discussion about comparative linguistics started and the search for the language of Babel started. So everybody was trying to understand what this Babel place was and if cultures had any sorts of ideas about how languages branch it out. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for the thank yous. Oh, and thank you for the hearts. Thank you very much. We have to go. Oh no, there's a question and answer thing. I didn't see this box. So looking at the similarities between languages, does that imply one origin for all languages? I do not know. Uh, we know that there must have been one language, like Indo-European, that must have been the original language from which all of these family of languages sprouted. So if there was this Indo-European, then there were other kind of proto-languages in other families as well. But then thinking that there was one on top of that, like where Indo-European and Uralic kind of came together and they belong to the same thing. Very, very, very difficult to say. It is, that's the thing. It's fascinating to research, but it's very difficult to prove anything. I read that many scholars do not believe the tree theory for the origin of languages outside. Oh, I lost the question. Where is it? I read that many scholars do not believe that tree theory for the origin of languages. What are the alternative theories? Yeah. Oh, like they haven't kind of come from the same family of trees. I don't know of any other alternative theories, but yes, the thing is that lots of scholars believe that actually the trees are different, so that they relate some languages more with one family than with others. But I don't know of any other alternative theories. I'm an Indo-European believer. Indo-European languages are currently believed to have originated in Ukraine. Oh, I don't know. Maybe yes, it's one of the I don't know exactly if it's Ukraine, but it's one of the areas where the homeland hypothesis is proposed. So, very fascinating. Is language an origin of diversity or the division? I would say language is never an origin of diversity or division. Well, I mean, diversity, yes, but not division. I think languages are a way of communicating, and we try to communicate no matter what. So, me and my horrendously horrible English, Spanish accent in English, I try to communicate anyway, even if I just pronounce things wrong. So I think it's not a source of division, but a source of unity. But yes, diversity and cultural richness, yes. There's only so many sounds that humans make, so the origin of one language or language sprout from is plausible. Yes, yes. You will have vision anyway. And said, unfortunately, yes. But we should aim for, this is what this conference also aims for, is to show how amazing all languages are and how equally amazing all languages are. And we should be proud of who we are and try to make this world better. So thank you very much. I have overstepped my time, but thank you so much for staying here, for having been so lovely. If you have any more questions, oh, I didn't put my email at the end, I think. But I'm going to put my email in the chat. So if you ever want to, if you need any help or anything, not money, just drop me an email. And the division, I know. Really different talk. Oh, good, perfect. Yes, this year I didn't go for practical topics. I went for highly theoretical ones. So I hope you enjoyed it and your brains are not too damaged uh, after after it. But yes, so thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the language show, and I hopefully see you next year. So thank you, and if gracias. If any questions, just drop me an email. Thank you very much. Bye.